Great. Okay, thank you. And thank you for everybody joining us today. My name is Councillor Elise Wilson. I am the leader of Stockport Council and I lead on economy and business for Greater Manchester as part of the Combined Authority. So a very warm welcome to you all that have joined us today for this timely Powering Up Greater Manchester roundtable. And I'm going to have to be really honest with everybody and say this is actually the very first time I'm chairing a roundtable like this, and so I'm going to ask you all for your patience with me as I hopefully get us through on time and as per the agenda without making too many mistakes. I'm really pleased that we have today so many businesses, political leaders across Greater Manchester, as well as industry and academic experts who have joined us and that will all help to have a really good debate with you know, on policy thinking, on Greater Manchester, on how Greater Manchester can lead the way to net zero and green recovery. I particularly want to thank Electricity North West for ensuring that we're all able to get together and really have this debate and this discussion. In the context of the COVID-19 crisis, decarbonisation of energy is crucial to the UK's green economic recovery, but there are serious challenges ahead as well as opportunities, I think. So before we start, it is important that I do housekeeping. Thank you for the slide. So the housekeeping points before we start are, please use the hashtag #PoweringUpGM and tag in Electricity Northwest and Devo Connect so that we can continue the discussion online. There will be some live polling questions that will take place throughout the session for panelists and for the attendees. So do get involved and give us your opinion. And while the panelists talk, please use the chat function to share opinions and comments from and that I will draw on to kind of help the debate go along. Indicate who your question's aimed at as well, and type your full name before the question. Also, panelists, please mute your microphone to reduce the background noise, and remember to unmute when you're speaking and use the raise hand function to participate. So where are we? So we have two excellent panels to bring together some key voices from politics and business and industry to look at those challenges and opportunities ahead for Greater Manchester. And the key questions we're seeking to address should be showing on your screens now. She says, there we are. Yes, perfect. Thank you. So how can Greater Manchester lead the way on net zero and the green recovery? And we have a series of questions there that should be on all your screens. So now, without further ado, I would like to welcome and introduce Paul Bircham, the Regulation and Communications Director of Electricity North West. Paul.
Hi, Elise. Thanks very much.
Hiya.
So, yeah, thanks for everybody attending today. Really looking forward to the debate. Greater Manchester has some huge challenges and, as you say, some huge opportunities ahead of it if it's to deliver on its bold ambitions to be carbon neutral by 2038. And Electricity North West, we stand shoulder to shoulder with all our colleagues in Greater Manchester ready to take on that challenge. We've committed ourselves to a 2038 target in line with that. And it's our job to ensure that the infrastructure is in place to enable that vision and make that dream of 2038 a reality, really. So, as you say, COVID-19 has created additional challenges, and that's why it's really important that as we think about the recovery from that we tackle new challenges that are going to be faced during that recovery phase, but actually maybe utilise a transition to a net zero and low carbon economy as a stimulus to help us with that recovery. and we all look to decarbonise our lives and our businesses and welcome that change going forward. So really, these are quite unprecedented times, and they make it more and more important for us to think together about these challenges, to have a joined up conversation about it, and for businesses and central and local government to work in harmony. And really, I think, a lot of people are taking a lead from the government on its plans for decarbonising by 2050 for the nation, and then more locally from the GMCA commitment to 2038. So it's great that we're getting leadership from local government, and then I think business needs to work alongside that. So what can we do in Electricity North West? Well, we're investing in a lot of strategic projects across the North West. To support Manchester, for example, we're putting in a lot of infrastructure now around the airport, where we have a big expansion planned with Airport City and a lot of economic growth in that area. We have other strategic projects to put in place capacity that enables this growth. You've seen a massive amount of growth in the city centre, all of that enabled. And now we're seeing it in the Northern Quarter, we're seeing it out around the Etihad, loads of different areas around Manchester where we're building up our network in anticipation of the growth of the city and various regions within Greater Manchester. And we're very keen to work with all of our partners and all the local stakeholders to understand their ambitions and their plans, and to make sure that feeds into what we're planning and doing. And we work with other infrastructure providers as well. We've worked, for example, with Cadent to establish a decarbonisation pathway that looks at, is it possible to achieve 2038? We believe it is. What are the challenges that we face as we do that? What might be some of the technologies that we'll use to achieve 2038? And how is that going to continually develop? We'll keep providing that information out to all of our stakeholders. So we've seen a lot of stimulus very recently at the national level with the Chancellor's spending review last week, following on the heels of the 10-point plan, which gives us a national infrastructure strategy committed to 100 billion of long-term spending to help tackle the climate crisis and work towards net zero. 12 billion pounds, I think it is, in public funding that should support 250,000 green jobs. 4 billion pounds of levelling up fund for economic recovery, and an infrastructure bank based in the north. So loads of stuff coming from the Chancellor. I'll be really interested in what our panellists think and how that will help us in tackling some of the questions that we're going to pose to them today. And really, I think this event is all about us building collaboration and looking at how Greater Manchester can continue to lead the way in green innovation, in developing new skills, in developing new jobs, and then getting on board with that green recovery that you've already mentioned, Elise. And really, that's why we've organised this event. It's really important time for Electricity North West and for all electricity networks. We are currently in the middle of our largest ever engagement campaign, and that is because next year we submit a business plan to our sector regulator, Ofgem, that sets out all the investments that we need to make between 2023 and 2028. So we need to really make sure that that business plan is fully informed and aligned with the needs of all of our stakeholders in Greater Manchester and across the North West. And therefore, we are doing as much of this kind of engagement to stimulate input to that as we go along. That's one of the reasons why we're doing the polling. That's one of the reasons why we're trying to raise our profile in this debate today. And that's why I'll be coming back to you at the end today and asking you to help us more and make sure that your views and voices are heard in our engagement approach. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say today. Great panel. Hopefully we'll get lots of interesting questions as well. And it's brilliant to be here. Thanks very much.
Oh, thanks, Paul. And thanks for bringing us together. You're absolutely right. We have some excellent panels that are hopefully going to help us really bring out some good ideas and some good debate. So I'd like to introduce our first panel today, which is our leaders panel. So we have Mark Atherton, Director for Environment from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, Councillor Angeliki Stogia, and I think I've said that right, but I'm sure she'll correct me if I'm wrong, Executive Member for Environment, Planning and Transport at Manchester City Council. We have Lord Andrew Stunell, and I want to thank you all for being with us today. So we're hopefully going to have a bit of an interactive conversation, and we'll get some interesting comments and questions, hopefully from our audience as well. But to kick us off, I think we're going to start with, what are the specific challenges for meeting net zero in Greater Manchester? And I guess I'll start with maybe Lord Andrew Stunell. Did you want to come in first on that?
Yes, okay, thank you very much. I'm sort of drawn the short straw. I'm glad to see I'm a Greater Manchester leader, perhaps a leader in thought, but not actually politically. Can I say that the key questions are what are the big environmental challenges and what are the big economic challenges for Greater Manchester? And of course, that's the same as the challenges that there are for the whole country. But Greater Manchester is its own place, and we've got our own positives and our own challenges. So I'll just say that I think the big environmental challenges are, first of all, to cut our carbon burn. That's the most basic thing. And the second is to renew our damaged ecosystems. We've done quite a bit already, but there's a huge amount more to do. If we do it successfully, we'll also, between them, hit a third important limit for Greater Manchester, and that is dramatically improve the air quality of Greater Manchester. So I see those as being the things that we've got to address on the environment front. And I'll come back to some of the how in just a moment. I think we've also got some big economic challenges. Greater Manchester has a gross value added of something like £60 billion a year. And we need to make sure that that grows and that we have a surplus, you might call it a profit, which we can then invest in the well-being of our communities, in good public services, and of course, in future investment and research and development. And the second element of that economic challenge is, how do we develop the skills and capacity of our workforce in order to achieve any of the things that we're talking about? Whether green or economic, you've got to have the skills and the capacity ready to go. And that is going to be the key to whether or not we can have a green recovery and whether we can have a just transition from the economic model we've got now to the new one coming. So how can we reduce carbon burn? Electrical distribution with our sponsors today, that's obviously very important. Transport, yeah, that's important too. Manufacturing, that's important. But we very often overlook the built environment, which is actually what Greater Manchester is. And 30% more probably of our carbon burn in Greater Manchester is our buildings and our built environment. And it's one of my hobby horses that we spend a lot of time getting our transport right and fiddling about at the edges with various things, but we don't tackle that central proposition. So what are we going to do about buildings over the next 18 years? That's how long we've got, 18 years before we get to 2038. Just to give you an idea, we've got over 1 million homes in Greater Manchester. We've got to improve them at a rate of 65,000 a year to make them zero carbon, if that's really going to be our aim by 2038. And that's a lot more cost effective than everybody having an electric car, by the way, in terms of carbon savings. And we've seen from the Green Homes grants, just at the moment, the government's got a plan to get 600,000 done by next March. Very ambitious, great idea. It's not going to be achieved. And the main reason it's not going to be achieved is there is not the skills or the capacity to do it. And that is true in Greater Manchester as well as countrywide. So we haven't got the right people to assess those homes. We haven't got the right companies, enough of the right companies to do anything about the homes. We haven't got the right tradespeople in place who can do that. And 65,000 a year, that's a capacity increase for our building industry in Greater Manchester, which I don't think anybody has quite faced up to. And so I'll finish by saying that I previously floated the idea that Greater Manchester should be doing the same as HS2 is doing to get its skills and capacity right. They have developed 2 of their own academies to train up railway engineers to service that project, because it's a long-term project and they know it's going to be a career for the future. We should be doing the same in Greater Manchester to make sure we've got the skills and the capacity to deliver the kind of upgrade program over the next 18 years, which has to be a core part of getting carbon neutral Manchester, Greater Manchester, by 2038. So my summary, Elise, is just to say we need to build an economic surplus from new green opportunities and use the strategic weight of Greater Manchester to build our skills base and our human capital to deliver a just transition to a carbon neutral economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Mark.
Thanks, Elise. I think this is going to be another one of those panels where all the speakers are going to be violently agreeing with each other, but I'll try and add value to what Lord Stunell has outlined. From a carbon perspective, the 3 big things that we need to do in Greater Manchester to get to carbon neutral by 2038 are decarbonise our buildings, reduce, if possible, fully decarbonise emissions from private transport, and generate more energy locally. And I'll touch on those 3 things in a little bit more detail. So I would fully agree with Lord Stunell that decarbonising our buildings tends to be the forgotten princess, tends to be the Cinderella. And there isn't really very many good reasons for that, because a lot of the simple measures that we need to take to decarbonise our buildings, at least to a modicum, are either relatively cheap or pay back in a relatively short period of time. So that points to an issue around not just capacity. I agree that is an issue, but it's also about knowledge and awareness of what can be achieved, and an understanding of what is cost effective. However, to really get down to zero carbon or net zero carbon buildings, we have to go an awful lot further. And there's some research that we're doing right now, which is looking at the whole building stock, whole domestic building stock, 1.1 million homes across Greater Manchester, and trying to identify how we take the existing building stock, domestic stock, to carbon neutral as quickly as possible. And that research will come out probably in the new year, but it's pointing towards the idea that actually decarbonising heat is the key thing, whether we do that via electrification or hydrogen into the gas grid. A modicum of insulation to make sure that those systems will work, and some form of energy generation for those homes that have the ability to take solar cells or solar thermal. And that's where the research is pointing. But what that doesn't take into account are 2 things which are really important. One is a fair and just transition. So how do we pay for that, particularly those people who have challenging financial circumstances? How do we ensure that they aren't disenfranchised? And how do we ensure that if it's an electrification route, our electricity system is capable of taking that sort of change? And there are some of the issues that we need to work through in terms of challenges. The big challenge, though, for us is that whilst I'm very welcome the government's Green Homes grant, I predict that in Greater Manchester, excluding the vouchers that people will apply for independently, we will be bidding for and hoping to deliver something like 25 to 30 million pounds worth of Green Homes grant in fuel poor homes over the next 12 months in Greater Manchester. And that's fine while the grant lasts. But the challenge for us is when the grant is gone, what needs to replace it? So my challenge is that I think that we need to find innovative finance mechanisms and finance routes to allow the mainstreaming and embedding of energy efficiency, particularly in domestic stock, but also in commercial and public building stock, to ensure that once the initial pump priming of the grants perhaps disappears or is reduced, that we have an alternative funding mechanism, because I think that's going to be important. The second point, and I'll be quicker about this, is around energy generation. In addition to solar cells and solar thermal, potentially also onshore wind is an opportunity for Greater Manchester. And I think there are areas where we can work better and closer with the DNO and others to ensure a quicker and more robust uptake of local energy generation. And we're working with the ENWL on particularly the business side, but also I think we need to lobby government about business rates for PV on roofs, and also try to find low carbon finance mechanisms to enable householders to take advantage of that. So we did run a scheme last year called Solar Together GM. It was very successful, but we know from the feedback that we could have quadrupled the output, quadrupled the success, if we'd offered some form of low carbon finance to go with it. And then finally, private vehicles. Everybody will be aware that Greater Manchester is currently considering an air quality plan and an air quality zone. And that is really to try and stimulate the uptake of ultra low emission vehicles in the future. I think that's one of those areas where the government has taken some leading steps by announcing when it would phase out the production of combustion engines, but really we need to try and find a way to go further and faster. And of course, the challenge there is that, again, from a fair and equitable point of view, how do you support those businesses and or people who will struggle to buy ultra low emission vehicles? How do you encourage them to do that without disproportionately affecting their lifestyle and their ability to transport themselves from home to work or from home to school? And I think there are lots of solutions that we can put forward in that space, but it's certainly one of the challenges. So they're my three key challenges, and I'll pass to others to continue the discussion.
Thanks, Mark. Really building on what Andrew said earlier, I think, but I'd like to bring in Angeliki to add her thoughts.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to thank you for creating the space for discussions on the key environmental and economic challenges, and I hope we're going to have a good discussion and also listen from our audience. Before I start on the challenges that we're facing, I think that we need to see also a little bit on the other side of the rainbow and also consider sort of the opportunities and why are we all sort of doing this. And I just want to pick very, very briefly on the few that are coming to my mind before I follow on what we're doing as a local authority and what are the challenges that we are facing. So, you know, on the other side of the rainbow, by achieving a zero carbon Greater Manchester, I think first of all, there's better natural environment for our residents, and the quality of our green spaces and biodiversity is going to be enhanced and increased. This is something that our residents are talking to us a lot about, especially how they have a newfound appreciation for the natural environments. Of course, improved air quality, which in turn reduces health or increases actually health outcomes. But also these improvements on people's homes are going to be lifting people out of poverty. Transport's a very, very important element of becoming zero carbon, more efficient public transport, integrated public transport, getting people where they want to be. But also we spoke about the economic benefits, new jobs, green jobs, improving competitiveness, but also supporting sustainable economic growth. But for me, I think achieving zero carbon is very, very important in terms of redefining as well as strengthening Greater Manchester's place in the world, as we are facing very, very soon the challenges that Brexit and other unknown challenges that Brexit is going to throw at us. So in Manchester, we have been doing a lot of work in this area for many, many years. And I think that as a local authority, alongside other local authorities, I have to say, in Greater Manchester, we are proving that it is possible for an organisation to step up and actually deliver against their strategic carbon ambition. So our climate change plan commits us to reducing our emissions in the next 5 years by 50%. And we are investing on a lot of projects and considerable amounts of money in this agenda. For example, we're investing on getting new electric refuse collection vehicles. We are investing on a major carbon reduction program, which is being rolled out across our operational estates. We have attracted European funding towards solar PV installations, for example, in the National Cycling Centre, in the Velodrome, and our Hammerston Road depot. We recently also finalised a bid into the public sector decarbonisation scheme as part of the Greater Manchester Consortium, and have also commissioned a feasibility study into opportunities for large-scale energy generation projects, which hopefully we will have some reports later on this month. So this shows that local authorities can move at pace and at scale, but we gotta have the financial support from the government, and also we gotta be able to protect our staff capacity as well as expertise. Now we recognise that the contribution that the city council can make to the city's short-term economic recovery, as well as the longer-term, if you like, opportunities in relation to the supply chain, in creating new jobs, but also supporting research and innovation. I think in terms of challenges, I want to highlight sort of two challenges. One is resources, and then capacity and just transition. So Manchester and Greater Manchester, we certainly all have the ambition and the political will to accelerate our journey towards becoming net zero, but there are clear challenges to overcome. The state of public finances as a result of the pandemic is a real threat to this agenda, and we must continue making the case for the wider benefits of zero carbon in relation to all of the things that I spoke about at the start. Good quality jobs, creating a greener, fairer and more livable city. And although we are having success as an organisation, I also echo what the other speakers have said in terms of increasing the pace of delivery across the city, and only 1% of the electricity is consumed in the city is generated within our boundary. We've got a lot of work to do on that. We need much better incentives in order to encourage commercial organisations to invest in this agenda, and at a time that most of them are actually struggling to survive. It is very challenging, the environment out there. Then the other thing is the government needs to develop a significantly funded incentivization scheme in order to promote solar PV and heat pump technology investment across the public, commercial and domestic buildings. And lastly, I think what we gotta lobby the government in terms of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which I think also needs to be targeted at investment in net zero carbon, as well as project delivery and job creation. And lastly, a just transition. I've got a lot to say on this. Perhaps some of it might come out in the questions, but I mean, it's a key challenge to ensure that transition to net zero does not impact on the finances of our residents. We hear that loud and clear. We already have significant numbers of people that are facing fuel poverty, that are losing their jobs, and we must ensure that new technologies will be bringing down energy prices rather than increasing them. The government's Green Home Start, yes, it's a start, but we need to get more resources available to our housing associations and to our local authorities. And then, you know, it is also a partnership approach in terms of how do we collectively tackle the challenges that we are being faced with. I think I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Angeliki. And I think you've ended on a really good point, haven't you, about how actually there are lots of challenges, but it is how we'll come together to do it, and how the role of everybody has to play their part. And I think the role of local government that you've really explained, you know, quite in depth about what Manchester City are doing, and as a city region what we're able to do around the ambitions and the space for local government to really make a difference on that. But I guess the challenge for local government always coming back to money and resources, and not necessarily a lack of ambition, but simply the hard readies, I suppose. And it kind of comes to one of the questions we've had brought from Pete O'Brien, questioning whether the government's 10-point plan and the £12 billion is enough to deliver a green industrial revolution. I'm going to try and make this quick fire if we can, a simple maybe yes, no, maybe a sentence at a push, and then we could, just so that we can get through a few of the questions, if that's all right. So Mark, let's start with you. Do we think it's going to be enough?
No, but it's a good deposit.
No, but it's a good deposit. Okay, Angeliki, is it going to be enough, do you think?
No, it's not. And the other area that I highlight is that all of the government departments need to start talking to each other, because, you know, everybody's biking up on a sort of different tree. They don't talk to each other. Please, guys, talk to each other. Partnership.
Yeah. Andrew, is it enough?
Oh, I agree with Angeliki. Get them talking to each other and put an extra naught on the end, and then I might say yes.
Okay. Okay. So we're going with it's a deposit. Mark joined up talking to each other. Peter needs to speak to Paul, and then maybe we might be able to get somewhere. Okay. So so again, I guess it's this resource. Then what we're saying is that fundamentally a lot of the challenges is about having enough resources to do it, but also I feel like what we're saying a little bit is about being brave on new ideas and new ways of working, and kind of thinking, okay, what are these new ways of working? What are these challenges, and genuinely understanding them, and then maybe being a bit more brave about how we do that. I guess I don't know whether that feels like something. It feels like something Mark was trying to get at, I think, before. I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Angeliki? Do you think it's about being more bold and brave?
I think it's about being bold, being brave. I think it's about thinking what are the practical big sort of projects and starting putting them in place so that we can secure major reductions in carbon emissions in the future. But I think the government need to develop sort of a significantly funded incentivization scheme in order to promote all of these schemes. But also I think the other thing that I am also quite annoyed about is that we got to be left to get on with our own, if you like, with our own speed. Let me sort of explain that. I'm referring, as an example, I'm referring to the sort of what is called the Part L proposals of the building regulations. So the government is saying that we all need to have the same sort of pace in terms of a universal standard as planning authorities. So they are restricting local planning authorities, the government, in order to be able to set higher efficiency standards for dwellings. And I think this is an example of where Greater Manchester has got the ambition, has got the leadership, has got the partnerships, has got the ideas to bring in projects, but we are being hampered by the government that is telling us, no, you know, you got to take it slower and you don't need as high standards. Now, why not? So it's not just the money, it's not just the partnership working, it's also being able to charter our own sort of future in terms of more, if you like, devolved power to be in charge of our destiny.
Thanks, Angeliki. I've got another question to bring in. We have a question for Mark, and I might ask Paul to come in on this as well, please. But on the current plans, will the UK produce enough carbon zero hydrogen to play a significant role in heating existing homes? I think that's from Mike Wilton.
I'll try and answer that, but there are other people on the panel who are probably better able in the second session. I think there's no doubt that hydrogen is likely to play a part in the energy mix in the future. I think there is a debate about how far the existing opportunities to generate hydrogen will go. And the Committee on Climate Change, I thought, was right when they said that focusing hydrogen on those processes which are going to be extremely difficult to decarbonise. So there's some heavy industry heat processes, some transport mechanisms which will be very difficult to decarbonise any other way, should be the priority for hydrogen. However, having said that, there are a number of projects in the Northwest that are either underway or on the stocks that could, in theory, generate a significant amount of hydrogen. The question, I think, still stands about what the cost of that production would be, and how much could be produced cost effectively, and whether what the carbon impact of that will be. So how low carbon is hydrogen, especially if we're talking about blue hydrogen rather than green. And I think those are the questions which are still open to debate and probably will be for the next few years. So in the government's 10-point plan, they're basically signalling a number of trials and quite heavily investing in some of those trials. But they're also saying that they'll make a decision around hydrogen on around 2023, 2025. I think one of the challenges, and this refers back to the previous question, of Greater Manchester having a 2038 target, is it's 12 years in advance of a national target. And so whether it be about retrofitting existing buildings by a certain time, or as Councillor Stogia said, talking about dates for new build, because the government has a longer term deadline, they can push out some of these decisions into a bit of a longer time frame. Whereas for Greater Manchester, it becomes, well, actually, we need to make a decision quite quickly because we haven't got as long as everybody else, or haven't got as long as national government if we're going to meet our deadlines. And this is where the challenges around whether hydrogen will come soon enough for us will come into play. But it also plays into the government's discussion around setting targets for new build, and whether that's soon enough for us. It might well be soon enough nationally, but for Greater Manchester to meet our target, it might not.
Paul, did you want to comment on this?
I would just add really to what Mark said by saying, when we look forward to how we can achieve a 2038 target, it's clear that hydrogen has a significant role to play in the mix. And it is one of the biggest areas of uncertainty. As Mark says, we don't know what the pace of that development will be. It will require support from government, but we're really pleased to see the major investments in hydrogen being announced in the 10-point plan, and expect to see other things as well. So I think definitely hydrogen has an important part to play in the mix. The uncertainty is how big that part is, how much, but that shouldn't hold us back from taking forward all the different ideas that we can see, because I think to achieve these really ambitious targets, we need to take every single lever that we can find and push it to maximum. You know, this is a moment when we need to turn the volume up to 11 on everything we can think of if we're going to get to 2038. So we shouldn't overlook any options and push forward on every front that's available to us.
Thanks, Paul. And just we've got another question from Lydia about what you were talking about, training and skills, Andrew, and certainly as the economic lead for Greater Manchester, for me, the talent pipeline, how we ensure that the future generations have the right skills for the jobs of the future, but also how we help people who may find themselves out of work now get new skills quickly into new frontier sectors. Obviously, this is one of those frontier sectors. For me, it also includes digital, advanced materials, health innovation. There's a few, but how do you were talking earlier about an academy, about that. How important is that, do you think, around how we build on that and where we go forward. And I guess, so cheekily, there is also a question about how important is it to have a strategic plan of that, to think about how we do things as a city region, and collaborate across an entire footprint like that to really put the stepping stones in place.
Well, the easy answer to that is yes to everything you've said. I mean, we've got a further education sector in Greater Manchester, and I hope nobody be too upset if I said it's not very well integrated. It's not very good at delivering the skills which are needed, and it's not held in terribly high esteem by students who might be considering using it. So I think we've really got to put a real accelerator on the whole skills delivery scheme in Greater Manchester. I'm delighted if I'm talking to the horse's head on this question. That's wonderful, because I think it's really needed. But specifically, we know that there is going to be an expanding industry of retrofitting buildings in Greater Manchester, and you could link to that the necessary industry to make all future buildings zero carbon, which Angeliki was mentioning. I'm on her side for that as well. I think this is just a terrible panel. There are no disagreements between us. But I was drawing on the example of HS2, who've got a 30-year or 25-year delivery plan, and they're training people for the whole of their careers to work for HS2. It won't work like that exactly, but they have noticed a gap. They've actually more than noticed it. They've properly responded to it. Well, we're in the same position. We could get our FE sector to be on, to actually light up a bit and look clearly and in a concerted way at what the skills are that we need. And I think probably an academy dedicated to that is a way to go, a construction academy for Greater Manchester. We've got more cranes than any other city in the UK at the moment, quite apart from any question of the retrofitting. I just made a quick comment on hydrogen and heat, changing the carbon content of heat to homes as a kind of a quick fix. I'm a bit skeptical about that. We're always looking for labour-saving ways of not getting out of bed in the morning. And the reality is that the best benefit for people who live in those homes is lower energy bills, not changing the energy source. And hydrogen will not be a cheap source of energy when it comes through the pipe. At the moment, it's twice the cost of methane gas. So we need to be quite clear that what we're trying to do here is plug the holes in the boat, not just pump the water out quicker. And that's my analogy for homes and energy performance.
Sorry, Chair, can I just add something onto this? So clearly we're going to have we will be seeing an expanding industry and on low carbon retrofits. And although Lydia's question was specifically around young people, I would like to stress that we should not forget to include women into the workforce for that. And now, many jobs and opportunities that will be generated through the low carbon transition will require very, very sound technical skills. And we all know that there is a disparity in terms of women and men in science, technology, engineering, and sort of mathematic fields. And I think what also will be important in our endeavours is to level the playing field and facilitate skill building for everyone. I think on-the-job training is also very, very important in terms of bridging the skills gap. The other thing I think we need to consider is making sure that we hire at all levels and across the supply chain women in order to be able to get into these jobs. We know that women are underrepresented in technical sort of divisions that have sort of higher levels of the job ladder. And then also I think we've got to be looking at fostering a more inclusive work environment, both for young people as well as for women as well.
Thanks, Angeliki. Just before I hand over to Paul to take us into our first polling of the session. I did want to add, I think, which is important, is about the recent launch that the Combined Authority, along with the Greater Manchester Local Enterprise Partnership, did around Innovation GM, and that is very much looking at how we make the most of new ideas in a joined up way with our universities when those new ideas come around, and taking them and turning them into something that's actually deliverable for the marketplace, but also bringing business and idea making and it closer to those learning the skills, so that we can get a bit more joined up, not just in our higher education, but also with our further education, and bringing business in, so that we know that those people learning new skills are learning the skills that those businesses need, because I think that that's also really important. But without further ado, let's go with our first poll. Paul, take us to the first vote.
Okay, thank you, Elise. Yeah, so as I said, we are building our business plan for future investment, and one of the first questions we have on that is, what do you think should be the top 3 priorities for Electricity North West in Greater Manchester? Should that so pick any 3 from this list, and then can click submit at the bottom. So that's delivering a reliable network, building a resilient network, meeting our customers' needs, supporting customers in vulnerable circumstances, keeping employees and customers safe, helping the North West become carbon neutral, as we've talked a lot about already, and reducing Electricity North West's direct environmental impact. So if you could vote on those, please. That's great. And then when we've got some votes in, we'll have a look at the instant results. Well, I've got quite a few votes coming in already. And a clarification question: is it carbon neutral or net zero? So it probably is, if I'm technically correct, helping the North West achieve net zero, in line with both the government's target and GM's target. So can we see the results? Here we go. So 81% think our leading priorities should be helping the North West become carbon neutral or achieve net zero, whichever way you want to put it. And a spread across the others as well there. That's great. Thanks very much to everybody for that. That's very helpful information. And I'll be back later on with a couple of other polls. Over to you, Elise.
Oh, thanks. It's like, to me, who were they? I can't remember who they were, what the names were now. The Chuckle Brothers, yeah.
That's better than yours.
So I would like to very much thank our first panelists for a really interesting debate and discussion about those challenges that we're facing, and I'd like to now introduce our second panel to consider a bit more about the opportunities that we might have. So in our second panel this evening, this evening? No, it's because it's going dark outside. This afternoon still. Yes, so our panelists for this afternoon, for our second panel, Environment and Industry Voices, we have Ennis, CEO of Siemens UK and Chairman of Net Zero Northwest. We've got Tim Wood, Northern Powerhouse Rail Director for Transport for the North. Helen Boyle, Regional Development Manager from Cadent, and Neil Robinson, CSR Director, Manchester Airport Group. Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. So we are hopefully again have a bit of an interactive conversation where we'll also take some questions from the audience, but we'll I think kick off with about what is your business organisation doing to meet net zero and commit to green recovery. So I think who wants to start? Carl, shall I start with you, since your microphone's off? So that was easy.
Right, okay, yeah, happy to contribute, and just what a really interesting first debate, and lots of things discussed, and I'm sure we can add our voices to some of those questions. In terms of Siemens, what are we doing? Well, actually, we're 16,000 people in the UK, and about in 2014, given our portfolio, a lot of our portfolio of products and services are actually focused on the topic of decarbonisation. We decided what my French boss calls to me, drinking our own champagne was really important. I have a German boss and he talks about eating your own dog food, so I'm not so keen on that. So we use our products. So we set ourselves a target in 2014 to get to net zero as an organisation by 2030. And I'm pleased to say that at the end of this coming year, 2020, so at the end of this year that we're in, our analysis says we'll be 50% of our way to achieving net carbon. So how have we done that? That's a mixture of topics. Fleet, we have quite a large fleet of vehicles, and so slightly contrary to one of the earlier comments around the vehicles and being they're personally quite an expensive outgoing. For a business perspective, because of some of the sticks and carrots that get used to you, actually the vehicle itself could be quite cost effective. What is a challenge at the moment is the infrastructure to get people from A to B in a guaranteed manner. And it's okay if you're doing lots of local trips, but if you have varying long trips, that's quite difficult. And so, but we've made a lot of strides with our fleet emissions. Our offices, actually, the COVID experience has accelerated some of our use of offices from places that you go to work to now places you go to meet and you work from wherever you happen to be, as indeed we all are today. And we see that happening going forward. And so there's a consolidation around buildings. I would like to pick up on the building topic that was raised by Lord Stunell and Mark Atherton on the previous, about how important buildings are and building stock is. And one of the things we have to think about as Greater Manchester is a lot of good stuff that have gone on. And we were involved in a project called Triangulum, which was on the Oxford Road, a demonstration of basically a smart local energy system. And that was taking into consideration how you interact with your building, how you can use often backup generation that's there as a form of generation and storage. And so there's lots of clever things that have been done with our building stock, and it's really important that we address that and not just the sorts of big topics, albeit that the big topics are exceedingly important as well. And also pick up on the local energy topic. We completely agree with that. The importance of something like 50% of your bill that you pay for your electricity is actually not the cost of generating electricity, but the cost of getting it from where it's generated to where it's used. So actually moving local generation much closer to where it's used is an exceedingly important step. It also raises awareness of use and the value of electricity as opposed to always being on tap. And the other thing we've done, we have quite a number of factories up and down the UK. Actually, one of our global competency centres for small variable speed drives is in Congleton, and we've been taking steps over the last 2 years there to decarbonise the facility there, and it will be net carbon zero. It's our first net carbon zero factory in our portfolio, and that will be net carbon zero by the middle of next year. So things that we're doing. And in terms of opportunities, I've talked a little bit about some of the technology and demonstrations that have happened in the Northwest. Mark talked a little bit about hydrogen and the HyNet demonstrator that we have in the south of the region, and that's important because it's looking at the hydrogen economy, not just the generation of hydrogen, but also how you use it and how you do those at the same time, so you don't have either an oversupply of hydrogen or an undersupply, and also that's a demonstrator that can take us from blue hydrogen through to green hydrogen. I think there are lots we've shown that we can do or are on the cusp of doing. I would leave my comments to say two things. One is, as a technologist, it's odd for me to say this, but this isn't a technology challenge. There's very little that we can't do. But what we tend to do is demonstrate, and we need to stop demonstrating and actually deploy at scale, would be my first point. And as an industrialist and not a politician, I will say, why does that not happen? Well, from my perspective, it's around stable support mechanisms that allow solid commercial models to be deployed, and having that confidence, which will pull in private equity. And I will put to the question of, is 12 billion enough? The answer is no, but the government doesn't have to pay for it all. Right? What it does is it has to set the environment and create stable platforms. And then, just as we've done in offshore wind, I mean, 80% of the offshore turbines is one of my favourite stats. 80% of offshore turbines are Siemens turbines. I couldn't be more proud. But actually, most of that is private finance. It was started by the government pump priming and setting stable policies and creating contracts for difference, all sorts of things. So, but this can be done, but it doesn't have to be out of our pocket. But they do have to set the environment for the private capital to come in and know it's going to eventually get a return.
Thanks, Carl. Helen.
Hi.
So, talk to us about opportunities.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here this afternoon. Really pleased to be on the panel. Carl's nicked a load of points that I was going to raise. So
when you don't go first.
I know. I couldn't agree with him more on a lot of the points there. So Cadent Gas, we distribute, we're the UK's largest gas distribution network operator, and for most of the northwest, apart from the far north of Cumbria, we are the gas distribution network operator providing gas to people's homes. So what we're doing ourselves, we are looking at our fleet of vehicles at the moment and what we can do there. We do have some electric vehicles. We're also looking at hydrogen vehicles, as you would expect. And also, I think, Carl's point around the post-COVID world and what does that mean for offices and that kind of thing. Apart from our operational colleagues, the vast majority of our teams have been working at home for several months now, and that does lead you to look at what a kind of post-COVID recovery might look like in terms of that. And given how much a lot of people have enjoyed it and the positive impact it's had, not on everybody, but on a lot of people, and what that's done from a carbon perspective too. In terms of opportunities, so I think really building on Carl's points and talking specifically about hydrogen and the possibility of the hydrogen economy, and taking on board some of the comments from the first panel this afternoon as well, it's absolutely right. The scope and the scale of hydrogen and the potential that it could offer, it has yet to be determined, although the 10-point plan, Boris's 10-point plan announced the other week, provided a very, very strong signal in that direction. And I think I would echo Carl's point around the money on offer. So there's like 240 million, I think, being pumped into a hydrogen economy by the government. That's a drop in the ocean. But what it does is it acts as a signal for private investment, and we're expecting the government's hydrogen strategy in Q1 next year. So more and more is coming to align behind the hydrogen economy. And the point earlier on about the cost of hydrogen currently, again, absolutely right. But the example that I would draw on would be the one that Carl's brought out around offshore wind, and the cost there initially, until government created the enabling framework, the enabling policy environment that meant that private equity was poured into that, and those costs came down. And that's what we're lobbying government around at the moment, is to create the whole governance and the framework that needs to go with building basically essentially a new energy vector. So that's something that does need to come. And taking on the point about energy efficiency is a massive point, and really something that I would say, you could never kind of regret spending money on energy efficiency. Every pound that you spend on it is the best pound that you're going to spend from a point of view of saving carbon. And I don't think building the hydrogen economy actually stops any of that, because Mark's point about where hydrogen will concentrate on decarbonising first, it's absolutely right. Looking at industrial areas, which is why the HyNet project is so important for not only kind of the Merseyside area and that industrial cluster around that, but then broadening out to Trafford Park and those areas around Greater Manchester, but bringing in transport, and then the role that's probably, or the area that's probably the the most that's uncertain at the moment is around its role in the decarbonisation of heat. But when you look at the costs for energy efficiency in some buildings, it becomes so prohibitive that we expect a role for hydrogen to play in some of those. That doesn't mean that there is no investment in energy efficiency. Absolutely, the right thing to do, first and foremost, is look at investing in energy efficiency of our building stock. But some buildings, particularly the older ones, will be really, really difficult to make energy efficient enough to have an electric heat technology solution. I'd also just like to echo, but for a slightly different reason, Carl's point around, I don't believe this is a technology challenge anymore. The technology's there. And a slightly different spin on what he kind of said is, I think this is a stakeholder engagement challenge, and it's something that I say quite a lot. The technology is there on the main part to deliver it. So I would echo what Carl's saying about getting that investment to enable those not demonstrators anymore to really make this happening at mass scale, to actually bringing in business, because as soon as you bring in businesses and private investment, that's when it moves from small scale demonstrator to large scale happening. And also bringing people on board the journey with you, because at the end of the day, it's them that's going to have the new technology in their homes, whether that's a heat pump or a hydrogen solution. They're going to have to get used to. At the moment, vast majority of people are used to a little gas boiler sat there. What does the new technology look like? What does the world of the future look like that we are essentially going to have some people pay for, whatever that looks like at the end of the day? So we have to start engaging people on this process, and I think that's maybe what we've yet to get our heads around.
Thanks, Helen. Just before I bring Tim in, we've just been asked, have you set a net zero target?
I don't think, do you know what? I don't think we have, and I will need to check because I'm very new to Cadent. So it's a very good point. I will take that away and check. Not that I'm aware of at the minute, but it could be something that we've set in our business plan, and we're a year ahead of the electricity distribution network operators. So it's one for me to take away and double check.
Great. Thanks, Helen. So, Tim, what are our opportunities, and are we ever going to build confidence back in public transport?
Thank you very much. And look, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very much to Electricity North West for allowing me to speak. So the Northern Powerhouse Rail programme continues at pace, with big decisions being made and others fast approaching. At the Transport for North Board last month, the North civic and business leaders agreed initial preferred way forward for the NPR network, one that's really going to create thousands of jobs and provide a significant uplift in the region's economy. Initial agreement of that NPR network is a significant moment for the programme. Through Transport for the North has spoken with one voice and agreed the rail future that it absolutely needs. Funding and commitment for the project must be seen as a critical part of the government's desire to level up the North. The network includes new and significantly upgraded rail lines, the vast majority of which will be electrified. It will cut journey times, increase capacity, and drastically reduce carbon emissions. So for every single freight train, electric freight train that's on the railways, that takes 76 wagons off our crowded motorways like the M62. A virtually whole electric railway means we'll be capable of moving people and heavy goods on our tracks in a low carbon, energy efficient way. And this will play a major role in meeting the UK's net zero carbon goal by 2050. Diesel trains will be replaced with cleaner, greener electric ones, something that really makes economic sense too. The cost of electrification will be more than offset by lower capital costs of electric trains and lower energy operating and maintenance costs. We believe we will be taking, with NPR built, 64,000 cars off our region's roads every day. We'll be offering an extra 35,000 seats per hour at peak hour. And Manchester and the Greater Manchester region is really at the core of Northern Powerhouse Rail. Connectivity to and from this great city region will just be transformed. More frequent, faster and reliable services to destinations across the north will be delivered through NPR, opening up some greater opportunities in education, employment and leisure for Mancunians. As well as this, more businesses will be in closer reach of Greater Manchester, attracting additional investment, creating thousands more jobs. Development work with partners on finding the right solution at Manchester Piccadilly Station continues, but what is crystal clear is that Manchester will be served by an important and integrated hub for both Northern Powerhouse Rail and HS2 services, one that will further enhance the city centre through significant investment. Another integral part of NPR network is Manchester Airport, an integrated high-speed rail station at the airport means people and businesses across the north have access to global opportunities they need to thrive. By more than doubling the number of people who live within 90 minutes of the airport, NPR will open up key global markets, equipping business to trade far more effectively. In development of NPR, we're asking for the north to be freed from the poor infrastructure that has constrained its economy and its prospects for far too long. Commitment to rail infrastructure now will help to provide long-term certainty and get the economy moving, of course, in the wake of the current COVID-19 crisis. It's true, we have seen a contraction in passenger numbers over recent months, but NPR is a long-term plan for the rest of the 21st century and beyond, and we cannot let the temporary shock of the pandemic affect our planning for decades to come. To deliver NPR and HS2, we will need to be training that next generation of engineers now, going into schools and colleges to show what can be done in the rail industry and inspiring young people to join a vibrant and growing industry sector. We'll need around 50,000 people to help us realise our vision for transport for the north. We really stand at an important moment in North's history. The steps we're going to take over the next few years will help shape our destiny for decades to come. And I think just referring to Angeliki's comments, so in transport for the north and within NPR, our bias is 48% women, 52% men. Normally in the rail industry, it's around about 13% at the moment. So we really want to be a trailblazer for that. And I think just listening to the panel and the first comments made by Lord Stunell, you're absolutely right. There is no rail training school in Manchester. There is in Newcastle, there is in Leeds, there is in Liverpool, but there's nothing in Manchester. And I think really being at the centre of NPR is vital. Those skills and those people, we have the right kind of facilities in place to drive this programme on. So we were funded out of the spending review for another £75 million for this next year, which is great news. We could also have an extension over and above that on accelerative works, but we are moving at pace. Northern Powerhouse Rail is going to be built, and we've already started looking at 2 new stations in Barnsley and Rotherham and accelerating electrification works to start on the Leeds to Hull route. But what we really need to do is make sure that we've got the people to deliver it. And just in crystallising my final comment, in the rail industry, half the people that are in the industry at the moment will have left, either retired or moved on to something else within the next 15 years. And that's the one biggest constraint that the Treasury said to me. If you haven't got the people, you won't get the money. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Neil, what are the opportunities? It's hard to, I can't imagine how stressful it is at the minute in the current climate for Manchester Airport Group, but talk to us about what opportunities you think there might be.
Well, it's lovely to take part in the conversation this afternoon, particularly to look forward to a brighter future on the difficult times we're living in right now. Yes. In terms of what we've been doing in this space, we've been working for quite a long time, really. We made a commitment to make our airports, that's Manchester, East Midlands and London Stansted, carbon neutral in 2007. And we spent about 10 years getting there, but all of our airports are certified as carbon neutral. And some of the things that we've learned along the way really is that probably the single biggest thing we did was to take Lord Stunell's analogy. I think we fixed the holes in the boat rather than pump the water out faster. I think we just became much more efficient in how we use energy. So we're much more intelligent in our building management systems, in the way we light and heat our buildings, in the air tightness, the insulation and the building fabric. So much of the things that that aren't really at the sort of exciting end of the spectrum, but are absolutely the right place to be. And I can see some real read across in listening to the earlier contributions about building stock, because what we found is that once we got into energy conservation and more efficiency in a really serious way and internalised the cost of carbon, it was much more straightforward than we thought it would be. And that's because all the right business drivers are there. So there was a higher capital cost, but when we looked at whole life costs, there was a really strong business case to do what we're doing. And most of the work that we did in energy efficiency passed the usual standard investment criteria that we'd have for any other project. So when I look at something like the building stock and the panel there of 65,000 homes a year and £1 billion worth of investment, that sounds like a really fantastic business opportunity for someone. It sounds like it needs the right framework of investments and funding to bring that to bear, as it were. So that's very much where we started. We inevitably use a lot of electricity in particular. So we buy all of our electricity from renewable sources. We started buying electricity from renewable sources around about 2003-04. We've bought 100% renewable for nearly 10 years. And we like to think we're one of those big purchasers that helped to stimulate the market and pull some of that capacity through in the early days. And then what we're left with, I think, if we look at our site, is a small amount of offset. And there are a couple of troublesome areas that we found harder that we're now going to work out. So looking forward for us, we've made a commitment to make our airports zero carbon by 2038, following the Cities League. And the two things that we now need to get on top of, really, one is the vehicles that operate around our sites. Somewhere like Manchester Airport, you've got nearly 5,000 vehicles. It's like a small town. And what I think we've found difficult is the additional cost to buy low emission alternatives. But it feels like we're really on the cusp at the moment of getting over that problem and facing what is really very similar to the problem that people have in their everyday lives with light vans, vehicles and cars. But it feels like that's a problem that's on the cusp of really making some progress now. And one of the other interesting ones for us is we heat quite a lot of our buildings still with gas, as I know, domestic properties do. We need to work that gas out as well. And interesting, when you look at some of the options we've considered, and we've looked hard at things like combined heat and power, particularly biomass-driven combined heat and power, and there could be a really strong case for us to do that at quite big scale. But to make it efficient, what we need is to use all of the electricity and all of the heat. And we've got an insatiable demand for electricity, but actually our demand for heat gets smaller and smaller because the more efficient we become, the less heat we need to heat our buildings. But if we could pair up big installations like shopping centres, airports, factories that have big electricity demands with domestic settings where there's a big demand for heat and a relatively low demand for electricity, we could probably make combined heat and power work much more efficiently for everyone and make much greater scale of it. And do so in a way that, again, has got a very effective business case. And I suppose my last point, before I move on, is I think one of the things that all businesses need to do when they look in this space is not stop at themselves. You have to look at your whole value chain. There's no point in making your own business net zero if your suppliers and customers aren't coming on the same trip. And clearly that's probably more important for aviation than just about any other industry. That making our airports low carbon is a very good start, but it's far from being enough. And so we've worked really hard with all of our sector, with airline partners, with manufacturers, with air traffic control, to come up with one combined plan for our industry that gets the industry to net zero by 2050. Do that by quite radical investments in aircraft technology. But one point I did want to flag, because I think it's relevant to the Northwest in particular, is we think as an industry, by the time we get to the middle of the century, about a third of the fuel that we'll use would be manufactured from sustainable alternative sources. So it's manufactured kerosene. And we think that across the UK, they're really, again, on the cusp of a really exciting opportunity. We think there's probably going to be 7 centres for manufacturing sustainable fuels across the UK. And we think one of those could be in the Northwest. We think there's probably somewhere around about £220 million of additional value. We think there's probably about 1,500 high quality green jobs in it as a start. And we know that there's really powerful government support for that at the moment. As part of the 10-point plan, the government announced £15 million support for the industry for next year alone. And there's a really active conversation about a further £400 million of support to come to follow that. So I think in some ways, finding the business opportunities to decarbonise industries like ours is a really good way forward. And the North West has got a particular opportunity right now to get behind this new industry and generate a whole set of really new, exciting green jobs.
So in terms of green jobs, Andrew said earlier in the panel and I might bring you in again on this, about the need to make sure that we have the skills coming, the talent pipeline ready to actually to fill in the gaps, those new jobs, and to fill the vacancies, I suppose. I guess where do you see the role of business in doing that, and how close are you to actually helping drive the skills agenda, if you like, and making sure that that new talent pipeline has the skills? Yeah,
I absolutely recognise the point that Lord Stunell raised, actually, because one of the challenges we've got in the future, just generally for the business, is, you know, we hope and expect to return to pretty rapid growth, and we know that we need to support the growth of our business, probably about another 16,000 people to come and join our airports. So what we've been investing in heavily in recent years is exactly that skills agenda. So all of our airports have got on-site education centres, and we welcome about 9,000 young people a year to come and learn about aviation. They've all got employment academies, because what we really want to do, and Manchester's such a good example, is take our demand for people and inject it into those communities that need that employment and those skills most. So we've got employment academies that work particularly with those who are out of work. And we recognise that we probably need some higher end skills and more young people. So one of the things we've done initially at Stansted Airport is we've built our own further education college on the campus. So we've got a 550 place campus that's turning out hundreds of young people in particular, and hundreds of apprentices that serve in the campus and generating our own sort of labour, as it were. How far we take that into some of these more technical green jobs, I think it's questionable about whether we're the best people and the best place to do that. But in terms of generating skills and generating people to come work in the industry, absolutely, I think we've got to be part of that overall picture.
Andrew, did you want to come back in on this, because you raised this point originally?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting how many people have picked up the skills point, and it's absolutely fundamental, because if you're talking about international employers considering moving to Greater Manchester, they're much more likely to be concerned about a skills deficit than they are that they're too far away from a national park, or, you know, we've got to recognise that it is a problem. And I think, well, I know you know this, Elise, as well, but I mean, there are a significant number of people in Greater Manchester who don't have the educational background and opportunities that you and I have had, and consequently are not able to take a full place in the labour market. And on the other hand, we've got all these opportunities which are absolutely waiting to go. So I think there is a role, and I would hope that the GMCA could really take a lead on this and help industrialists, manufacturers, the airport and so on, to pull together on this and really see what we can do to define what the need is, and then do something to satisfy that need. And whatever we might say about the dangers and damage of COVID, it does mean that there's quite clearly an opportunity for people to take a significant reappraisal of where their life is up to, even mid-career. And if they had those training opportunities, I think that is an opportunity. Well, we should create that opportunity. I would just say something, maybe the airport isn't the place, but maybe it is, because if you're a 16-year-old who isn't all that into school, and somebody says, do you want to join a builder and do insulation for the rest of your life, or do you want to work at the airport? I think more people will queue up for the airport. It's about the image of what we're trying to do as well. And if we can do something to get the image of working in a green industry for green outcomes to be a desirable thing that people really set out to do for their lives, I think that's another, we haven't touched on that, but it's a very important way of making sure that people actually go to the vacancies which we create and do the training that we want to see happen. But if this discussion only led to us taking a much more holistic view about getting that training agenda right and pushing it forward, I would think it would be excellent value for this afternoon.
Thanks, Andrew. Mark, you're indicating, did you want to come in?
Just very briefly to answer Lord Stunell's and other people's points. My colleagues in the skills team have already undertaken intelligence gathering for green skills development. And they've also undertaken some dissemination activities through workshops to really understand what the demand is likely to be, what the supply chain is likely to want, and how we can go about creating or filling that demand through our skills programme. So we already have £100 million worth of devolved skills provision to meet employer training demands. And my understanding is that they're aiming to have a skills delivery for retrofit commencing in the spring of 2021. So they've done a lot of the thinking, they've done a lot of the consultation, and now they're putting a programme together which should be available for delivery in the next few months.
That's excellent.
Carl, yeah.
Just on the skills bit, just to add to those comments, and just to think it's not just about new entrants. That's one element. So contrary to what Tim said before about he'll have a big turnover of employees in the next 15 years. We did the stat. Our stats say that in the next 10 years, we know our business is going to be very different than it is now, and we also know that we're likely to have 80% of our employees still. So there's the reskilling topic, and the other thing that's changed. I'm often asked by our HR department, well, what do you want me to train them in? Right? What's that future skill? And we all scratch our heads. There is an important thing here for me. It's about we need to be skilling people to a mindset that makes them flexible. Because this idea that I started as an apprentice at 16 on the shop floor, and I've managed to blag my way through engineering for the last 35 and more years. That's quite rare. That's not going to happen so often now. So this idea that we make people open to the idea of change, that's also a skill in itself that perhaps we need to teach our young people.
Yeah, lifelong learning, isn't it? And resilience to change, I suppose, are going to be some of the key things that the next generations are going to need. But you said, Carla, kind of when you first commented in it, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit now, but it was about where we live. And by that I mean quite like the place where we are, and I don't just mean the homes that we're in, but where we spend our time, where we bring up our children, the buildings that were already here, and how we're regenerating maybe areas, certainly. And I think about Stockport and the Mayoral Development Corporation and a lot of the work that we're doing there, and what those new buildings and those new neighbourhoods are going to be like. But the importance of really understanding that and tackling that issue. I don't know if you wanted to expand slightly on that, and then.
Well, I think it was the topic of community and this idea of re-engaging a community with its energy usage and understanding, and I think that we can use technology to help with that, because I'm always reminded of the Economy 7 example, right? So we almost gave the electricity away for free, but because it was in the middle of the night and nobody wanted their dishwasher and washing machine running in the middle of the night, we didn't do it. So I not that I want to be controversial for the sake of being controversial, but perhaps I'll disagree a little bit with what I thought Lord Andrew said before around keeping the price of electricity low. There is a risk with that, and that is if you think it's cheap, you devalue it. And actually, I think people should think very carefully that actually what happens and the real value of electricity is an important one. Now, I do think we have to think that in the context of fuel poverty very, very carefully. But just keeping cheap electricity is not the right answer. And actually engaging a community in where their electricity comes from, the old environmentalist adage of reduce, reuse, recycle. It was always reduce first. Yeah, so how do you get that efficiency down? That's absolutely has to be our first target, hence why we should create local energy systems, not in place of centralized energy systems, but in support of central energy systems. And I think it's that re-engagement with our systems. Whilst you don't have to be a technologist to do it, and we can use technology to help simplify that, and smart meters is a great first step, but there are many steps beyond that we can do. But I do believe actually that's where the community element will come back in, and I think when people start to appreciate that, then it's likely you get more engagement and care for what's actually happening in your energy systems around you.
Oh, I'm on mute. That was a mistake, rookie mistake. So I'm going to try and do what I did before and ask you some quick fire questions. Now, I'm going to do my best on this because they're in the chat, and I want us to try and get through some of them. What we have here, panel, enormous amount of procurement influence. What are the organisations doing to address Scope 3, including carbon emissions in their supply chains? So procurement and supply chains. Helen, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's I think it's a key one for network operators in the next price control period. I think they've done a lot, I'm talking collectively, to drive down Scope 1 and 2 emissions, and I think where actually the biggest challenge and therefore the biggest opportunity lies in Scope 3. And I'm sure there's work that we're looking at now included in our next business plan period, focusing on targeting our supply chain, bringing them on the journey. A lot of suppliers will be pushing at an open door with, because they'll also be supplying, won't just be supplying Cadent, they'll be supplying lots of network operators. So they will be, I suppose, used to the fact that this is coming their way and receptive to it. But I think that's where the biggest gains are going to be made in the next price control period. I think a lot of really good work has been done so far at Scope 1 and Scope 2. But as network operators, the key challenge for us is to bring the suppliers along with it to make the really big gains that we're all now committing to, really.
Tim, did you want to come in at what supply chains and procurement?
Thank you very much. I think for us, what's really important is that we make the case for NPR to happen. That's at our March board meeting on the 10th of March, so a really big day for us next year. But I think in terms of the supply chain, the way they operate using electric vehicles to get to and from site, using electric vehicles on the site in terms of construction, it's the way that we write the contracts, and we make sure we bring out, in effect, the key pieces around the jigsaw puzzle to construct NPR in a zero carbon way. And how can we do that? And I think a lot of the great learning that we've already heard about today, you know, our ears are open and our eyes are open to talk to businesses to help us frame what those contracts would look like going out to market.
Thanks, Tim. Question from Jan Lawrence. Carl raised an interesting point around the high cost of getting energy to users and point out what we need to look at, that we need to look at local energy networks. What are the land take requirements and plans for this? And I hope Paul and Helen can pick up on respective sources of energy and smart technology. So Carl, I'll bring you in first.
Yeah, so that's the challenge. And actually, I'll pick up on Angeliki talked in her piece about devolution of powers, and I think that I believe that. I think it's right that local people and organisations are best placed to determine what's required locally, i.e., planning conditions and brownfield sites for renewable solar farms, etc., on onshore wind. I say as an industrialist, engaging with local government, that's not always the easiest. We do some work with the UK 100, where we've been trying to support them and grow the relationship between commercial organisations and local government. And I think, you know, sometimes we run for the hills because it just gets too complicated. So with that devolution of power comes a responsibility to actually organise yourselves such that you can engage with commercial environment.
Thanks, Carl. I have made the rookie mistake of running slightly behind schedule. So I'm going to ask Paul. Paul, I think we've got a second poll that you need to do for us before we completely run out of time. So I guess to you.
Thank you very much, Elise. Well, we can do this one really quickly. A very simple question, if we can get it up on the screens. Here we go. Yep. So do you think Greater Manchester is on track to meet the net zero target of 2038? A yes, no, or not sure. Please click your answer and press submit. So let's see how many votes we've got there. Okay, a few more just coming in. Can we have the results on screen, please? Thank you very much. There we go. So still on the fence. Most people, the majority of attendees here are not sure, but they're either not sure or it's a no. There's not a huge confidence yet. So I think that shows we've got a long way to go. But in the interest of time, Elise, shall we move on?
Yes, and so I'd like to thank all our panelists again for a really interesting conversation and discussion, but I'd like to introduce Steve McMahon from Ofgem to come and talk to us all. So Steve, over to you.
Thank you, and I'm assuming I'm not being timed out here, so I've still got a little bit of space just to get through. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, first, thanks for inviting me along to give the Ofgem perspective. So I'm Deputy Director for Electricity Distribution Networks, and I'll lead our work on the design of the next set of price controls for the local distribution grids. So the price controls, or REAL as they're called, is our name for the limits or the controls that we set on the gas and electricity networks. So for example, for Cadent or ENWL, for how much revenue they can recover from their customers. The next set of price controls for ENW and the other DNOs start in 2023, and the companies are now working with their stakeholders to pull together the business plans for us at Ofgem to assess from next year, and Paul was describing that earlier. I think when I look at the local distribution grids, these are going to be the biggest and most dynamic of all of our price controls as we move to a much more decentralized, data-driven sector. And ED is also where the net zero challenges are probably at their greatest when you think about transport and heat. So clearly the transition to net zero requires a major transformation of the sector. You're seeing that through the continued decarbonisation of power. I think the electrification of most surface transport, road and rail, and moving to low carbon energy sources for heat. I think in some areas there's pretty much broad consensus on the direction of travel. For example, electric vehicles and transport, or accelerating the deployment of renewable power, offshore wind. In other areas, there remains quite a bit of uncertainty, as we were talking about earlier. So for example, on the heat side, where we have questions around the balance between electrification and hydrogen. I think even with these uncertainties, and after we've exploited all of the capacity that is in the grids at the moment, all the flexibility and smart technology opportunities, I think it's pretty clear that there's a significant amount of expenditure that's going to be required to meet the net zero targets. We talked about the government contribution to that, but the overall size is going to be significant. At Ofgem, we obviously play an important active role in that, in terms of how we facilitate investment in the networks and ensuring it's spent efficiently by the likes of ENWL and Cadent. As the regulator, we've got two equally important challenges. One is how we protect today's consumers to make sure they get a fair deal, and then how we protect consumers in the future by tackling decarbonisation. I think back in February, in what was the first day in role for our new chief exec, we published our decarbonisation action plan at Ofgem. For us, that was a big milestone and a statement of our commitment to supporting the transition to net zero. We said in that we consider our duty to protect consumers very much includes helping to hit the net zero targets passed by Parliament and the net zero targets that we have in the local areas. We are obviously a creature of statute, and we have to work within the policy framework that's set by government. The more clarity we have on not just the ambition, but the policies that will deliver that ambition and how they'll be funded, then the more certain that we can be in our own decision making. So we obviously welcome the UK government's plan for the Green Industrial Revolution. We'll continue working with government, national and regional industry and wider stakeholders to make sure that we can play our part in the delivery. In terms of the networks, we've obviously got some big milestones coming up on the RIIO-2 programme. I think through the course of December, I'm sure people will want to look at those decisions closely. I think for us, it's about supporting decarbonisation while keeping or protecting consumers by keeping costs low. In terms of costs and how they fall, the reality is that there's multiple pathways to net zero, and we don't know how much it will cost to hit the targets being set nationally or locally, including your own 2038 target. I think for us, it's just about having that priority of decarbonisation at lowest cost. We know there needs to be investment, I think, particularly on the electricity grids. So our broad strategy is to encourage the networks to be as efficient as they possibly can be on non-net zero costs, so we can support the new investment that is required whilst also keeping bills affordable for consumers. At the same time, we've also got to make some difficult decisions about how the costs of meeting net zero targets in the areas that we regulate are distributed across different consumer groups. So for example, how the costs of upgrading the grids to accommodate electric vehicles are balanced between those who actually use an EV and wider consumers. So they're difficult decisions, but we approach them in an open and evidence-based way. If I think about what happens now in the networks and where we're headed, there's probably two dimensions where our approach to regulation needs to evolve. I think, first of all, if we're going to meet net zero at lowest costs, that our decisions on price controls and regulation need to be closely coordinated with those of policymakers, and we need to be supportive of the long-term ambitions that different parties have for infrastructure strategy and planning. I think that's absolutely critical. The second element is that policy for net zero is not going to develop in nice, neat 5-year segments that align with our regulatory timetable. So we need to be much more agile and flexible in our approach to regulation. And that's pretty much the approach that's underpinning the design of our RIIO-2 price control. So that means like much more flexible in-period funding that can be committed once policy becomes a lot more certain. So in both those respects, RIIO-2 is going to be materially different to the current, the current RIIO-1 price controls. And I think if I'm just to close off, if I'm staring into the horizon, we're obviously looking forward to COP26, quite close to me in Glasgow next year. And we're keen to be an active part of those discussions, not just in terms of what we can do to support the transition to net zero, but also in bringing together international regulators, reflecting on what we need to do to support and drive forward net zero across the world. So hopefully that's been fairly helpful in setting the context that we're working in Ofgem.
Thank you, Steve. One of the big issues, I think it was raised in one of the first panel questions, was around actually having different targets. We have a 2038 target in Greater Manchester, but it's different than the government target. And so actually, how do we make sure that we continue to be ambitious, all of us, keep striving to go forward at pace, but how do you kind of pull all that together, I suppose, is a big point for us, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the key is certainty. So we see lots of different levels of ambition, some 2030, others 2038, others a bit further into the horizon. So for us, it's just about creating the regulatory environment that allows these targets to be met. Paul and his team will be looking at what that means for ENWL, the same as the gas sector's looking at for Cadent. I think the key thing for them is how certain they can be. So it's not just the target, it's the policies that underpin that target, and the funding as well. Where we are certain on things, we can give upfront funding for it. Where things are less certain, then we've got mechanisms that can allow the networks to respond as and when required through the price control period. So it is a very much an active part of our considerations. We want to support regional pathways, but obviously we've got to make sure we protect consumers' interests in doing so.
Thank you, and thank you, Steve, for joining us. Really interesting addition, and I'm so sorry that we're running out of time. It's clearly my rookie mistake, but it was really great to have had you with us. So thank you for making the time. Paul, come in and help us sum up at the end, please. Well,
thanks, Elise. It's been a really great debate. As you say, it could have gone on much longer. Actually, there's loads of input from our panel, loads of great questions from our audience. We will capture all this information. All the questions that we haven't managed to answer today are things that we will take and consider, and those points of view are really important to us as well. But just from me to say, it's really, really great to get all this input, and I'm really, really pleased by the level of debate. And what I will do in the interest of time is quickly move on to our final closing poll question. So as we build a business plan, and so I'm going to send it to Steve next year, he's the man who's going to catch it on the other side. do we think it in Greater Manchester? Do we think it's important to keep our part of the bill as low as possible by being reactive as we develop towards the future, or do we need to be proactive? Do we need to bring forward future investment to increase capacity in the electricity network and enable faster pathways to net zero? So here's a chance to give Steve a first view of the views of the people of the Northwest. So could you click on your option and press submit now, please? Now, we may have lost a few voters as we've run over slightly on the time. But can we have the results? Oh, there we go, Steve. Can you see that? A 100% vote on bringing forward future investment and to increase capacity. So that's an indication of the kind of passion that you're going to get from a business plan for the Northwest in terms of its embracing net zero and making sure that we move forward quickly. So the last closing comment that I need to make is, first of all, to thank our brilliant panel, to thank Steve for coming on and speaking to us, and to thank Elise for being an excellent chair full of enthusiasm and getting loads of people involved and bringing in loads of voices from the audience. So you've done a brilliant job. Thank you very much for that. It's been excellent. And then just to close out by saying to everybody that look out for the next bit of engagement that we'll be doing, which will be testing views on our business plan. So we will be consulting on all of the propositions that we've heard from all of our stakeholders and what you want to see included in our business plan. So there'll be a survey coming out online to everybody who's been participating in these events. You can register, take part in that survey, give your vote, and have your voice heard in shaping the future and the business plan we submit next year. So thanks very much to everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you.